Welcome to another edition of Interruptions. I'm your host, Oda Smith. Today, I got another treat. I have a mentor, a friend I would like to call to discuss the last 24 hours of Jesus' life since we're coming up on Easter Sunday. Dr. Mark Chironna. How you doing, sir?
I'm great, Otis. How are you? It's
I'm
great to
doing okay. I tell you what, you're a better man than me. I had to die this. I'm not ready for the great. I'm not
see
ready.
Yeah, I just, you know, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah, it's some days it is. All of this is great, and then soon as depending on who I'm about to interview, it turns black. My wife and my barber told me, just let it go. Just let it go.
Yeah,
I've wanted to have a conversation with you. I was thinking,
sure.
I know, as you know for yourself, a lot of people do the seven last words or whatever
Hmm.
of Jesus, and I was sitting back and I was thinking, and God just, nudged my spirit like the last 24 hours. And the first thing that caught me is my backdrop, which is uh, why the Garden of Gethsemane, the pressing place. Why Jesus chose to say, hey, come pray with me. He could have went anywhere. Could have went anywhere. And then I thought it was fascinating that it was the pressing place far as when we talk about the olive oil that we anoint in the pressing place. So I was like, wow, he took them to come pray with him to a place that was going to press him.
Yeah, so it's a great question. There's a lot going on there. So obviously, the scriptures do tell us it was his favorite place to pray, so that the disciples
Mm-hmm.
often went with him to Gethsemane. And I've had the privilege of preaching uh, at the Mount of Olives in Gethsemane
Oh,
years
okay.
ago for God TV. I preached there, and some of those trees, those olive trees, are thousands of years old.
Wow.
And so, as you're standing in that olive grove,
Mm-hmm.
you realize I'm somewhere around here. Jesus sweat drops of blood into this ground, and it's
Right.
as he was praying. And so it's when you're there and you're
Mm-hmm.
standing on that dirt in that beautiful grove of olive trees that again, many of them are quite old. You realize one of these could have been where Jesus was actually kneeling down and praying. When we think about, can I back into this and then you interrupt me whenever you want?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, on the night that Jesus is betrayed by Judas,
Mm-hmm.
he changes the order of the Passover Seder. So,
Okay.
there are four cups to the Passover,
Okay.
and one of the cups is the cup of Elijah, which
Okay.
the firstborn son goes to the door and opens the door, beckoning for Elijah to come, because within the context of Old Testament
Mm-hmm.
prophecy about the spirit of Elijah and the belief in the ancient Jewish community, Elijah was going to come before the days of Messiah. Now, Jesus makes it clear that that was John the Baptist, but that
Right.
doesn't mean people didn't have other beliefs. But within the Passover Seder, symbolically, the firstborn son would go to the door at a specific time, open the door, and because there was a cup that Elijah was to drink. Well, on
Okay.
the night Jesus is betrayed, he takes the cup after supper, which is the
Mm-hmm.
third cup,
Mm-hmm.
and he shares that with them as the renewed covenant in his blood. And then it says that in John's gospel that they sang a hymn, which was Psalm 118, the great Hallel, and they departed and crossed over the Kidron Valley. So they never drank the fourth cup. But in the
Mm.
garden, Jesus situates Peter, James, and John
Mm-hmm.
in a certain place to pray, to watch
Right.
and pray with him for
Right.
an hour. He's asking for 60 minutes of their time.
Right.
And he goes a little further and he begins to enter into his suffering right there. So, and in that suffering, as you know, he agonizes three intense seasons of agony and travail and intercession where he says, if it be possible, remove this cup. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine. And a
Right.
lot of times, as saints, we get that wrong. We fundamentally misunderstand what's going on there. Jesus is very, very, very committed to going to the cross. So that's not what's going on there. So I'll set that
Okay.
up and you can go with me from
Okay.
there. So why is that so significant? And what is it that we need to understand about that?
That okay. Let me ask you this, and you probably can bring that point that you're going to bring on with that, because I also found something interesting. Doing the right thing when everything seems to go wrong in your life. So he's at a point, like you said, when Judas betrays him, brings the soldiers with him, betray him with a kiss. Peter gets upset, right? Grabs the sword and cuts the ear
Malchus's
off,
ear up.
right? And Jesus places it back.
Mhm.
So at his greatest, well, not at greatest, but at his intense moment of praying, talking about what you were saying, nevertheless, thy will be done. His sweat turns into blood. One of his disciples betrays him. He already told Peter, you're going to deny me three times before
Mhm.
the night is
And
over.
essentially, he commits basically the same sin as Judas, except that he repents, right? They
Correct.
both commit two sides of the same coin.
At the same coin, correct. But he thought enough to end his weakest in his, I don't want to say the weakest, but in his moment of knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, he still blesses the soldier by placing the ear back. So he still did the right thing, even though it seemed like all was lost for him physically in the physical realm.
Okay, so let's take a step back and
Okay,
let's get back to what the
sure,
incarnation is,
right.
right? So the
Mm-hmm.
incarnation is when God assumes our humanity,
Correct.
takes on human flesh. We tend to automatically think of the virgin birth
Right.
as the incarnation. The challenge with that is that the early apostles and the fathers and mothers of the church that inherited the tradition
Mm-hmm.
begin at the cross when it comes to the incarnation.
Okay.
We don't because we think past, present, and future.
Future.
But if you remember, John says in the beginning was the Logos.
Well, right. Was
This
the
is the
word.
pre-existent
Mm-hmm.
Christ. And he is the lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
Well, right.
And he is the Son of Man. This is the prophecy of Daniel. This is the God man. He is fully human and fully
Fully God.
divine. He's
Right.
not two different people. He's one person,
Correct.
undivided, both human and divine. And we try to parse that out. We cannot. He
Right.
is in the totality of who Jesus is, he is fully human and fully divine.
Correct.
When he suffers for us,
Mm-hmm.
this is the last Adam, not the first one. This is the
Right.
last Adam.
Correct.
This is the one in whose image the first Adam was made. So, for example, in the original story, they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden. Well,
Garden.
the only member of the Godhead that's visible and who has form is the second member of the Godhead, which is Christ, the eternal Son. So, the one who Adam would have had encounter with from the story is indeed the God man.
Correct.
So Adam is made in the image and likeness of the second person of the Godhead because he's the only one that we resemble, right? He is
Correct.
the revealed express image. Okay. So as the last Adam, he doesn't simply suffer as a single individual. He suffers as the whole human race. Now,
Right.
You and I, if we knew, if Otis and Chironna knew that
Mm,
within a number of hours we were going to be nailed to a cross and executed, we'd probably have anxiety for a month before. Jesus knows he's going to go to the cross. We would have anxiety, but because of who he is, he defers all that. He's very calm at the
hmm
supper. He's very intentional. It
hmm
is not until he enters into his passion that he allows the full weight of Adamic estrangement,
Okay.
isolation, and
Okay.
failure to pass through him. And he
Okay.
allows Adam's inheritance in the human race for the whole human race, because Jesus
Race.
dies for the whole human race beginning to end.
Correct.
So he's not suffering as one person. He's suffering for the whole human race. So he takes
Race.
on the weight of that whole thing, which because he's God as well as human, he can. And yet he experiences the human side or the human aspect of the fear of death, but he doesn't do it as though he's scared to die. He does it willingly to absorb our who through fear of death were subject to slavery all our lives. He allows that to come on him so that it
hmm
can pass through him because he can destroy it from the inside out.
Correct.
And yet he prays three times, not my will, but thine be done. But Jesus doesn't have a compromised will. You and I have a weak will. Even in Jesus,
Correct.
we still have a weak will. Jesus had a perfect will. He had two wills, a divine will and a human will. And his human will was perfect. It wasn't compromised. But he allows his human will to experience
hmm
our wrestling so that he can deliver us. He's not doing it for himself. And for him, the will of God is always perfect, always good, and never changes.
Correct.
So for him, this is part of the process. And so he gives voice to our fear of death. We want to make this as though Jesus is reluctant. Jesus is not reluctant at all. That's a fundamentally flawed way of understanding what's going on in the garden when he is sweating drops of blood. He's beginning to redeem us. The minute that first drop of blood hits, he's already redeeming us from the curse. Long before he gets to the cross, he's already redeeming us before he gets to the hall of Pilate, where he is flogged and the cat o' nine tails rips his flesh off his back. He's already redeeming us
It
in that
makes
act.
sense. It makes sense. I just want to stop it so
Yeah,
people see this. The reason it makes sense because when you understand, he already knew. That's why he said
absolutely.
that it was going over the disciples' head.
For
He
this
said,
cause
"I'll
came I
destroy."
into the
He
world.
said, "I'll destroy this temple, but I'll raise it
Yeah,
in
exactly.
3 days." So if you already know, you in
But
God's
he's got
perfect
to enter
will,
into it. He can't save us without assuming that. So
right?
to save us, he has to assume in his
That
person.
humanity. He has to take on
Well,
that
he has to
humanity.
assume that weakness for us
Correct.
because we can't overcome it in ourselves.
Right.
But this is the sinless, spotless Son of God. So he can assume this, and in his very decisions,
hmm
begin to change the human possibility. Everything Jesus does from the womb to the tomb is actually part of redeeming the human race.
Correct.
And so the
Yes.
cross is the culmination. And so and it says, Luke tells us that after he went through those 3 seasons of agony,
hmm
Luke says he rose from prayer. And that word rose is one of the words for resurrection. So if you remember in the Psalms, he quotes, "Thou wilt not allow thy Holy One to undergo decay, nor allow him to see corruption," right? So at some basic level for us, he has to enter into our suffering,
Right.
our isolation, our estrangement, and obtain the title deed. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the title deed of things not seen. So he's got to obtain the title deed for us. And so when it says he rose from prayer, he's already got the title deed for resurrection. And
Does
he
that
sets his face like flint, but he already knows this is a done deal. But he's doing that not because he needs to do it for himself. He's doing that for us. Everything he does in self-sacrificial, self-emptying love for us.
so that let me ask you this. So does that once he did that, does that now allow where you and I have seen certain relatives, especially back in the day, you would see grandma or whatever, and they're dying, but they're looking at you, telling you, "Don't worry about it, because
Yeah, because
I'm
he
going home
delivers, right? Yeah,
because what he took on, right,
absolutely.
in the flesh, far as in the Garden of Gethsemane, like I said, not even the cross, but and like you said, he rose, so because he's not dead yet, but he knows what's facing him,
Right.
so that's why we can have assurance when we know that we are in Christ, to live as Christ and to die as gain, right?
Mhm.
That when you're dying, you're taking on that same persona that he had that don't even I ain't even worry about it. It's
Well,
it's
it's not so much that we're taking on the persona, we're yielding to his indwelling presence. So, in
correct.
other
Right.
words,
That's what I
even
mean. Better
when we
word. Yeah.
face that, we're not facing that alone. It's Christ in us. He's
Right.
already been there. He knows the way through that, and he comes alongside us,
Right.
suffers with us in those fears because he knows the pathway through it, and he leads us through that. Which is very comforting. I mean, when we think about it, there's
It
not
is
one bit of suffering we endure
that he
as
has it
human beings that he is not with us in the suffering and doesn't know the way through. He's
it
tasted death for every
and took the
single
sting out of
human being.
it. And took this because it's amazing. My wife and I talk about it all the time. When my mother passed, we kept saying back in 2017, my mother said, "Well, I'm going home Friday." And I said, "No, the doctor said if the blood clots dissipate, he can let you go home Saturday." She kept saying,
I'm
"No,
going on Friday.
I'm going home." And it was
Yeah.
just like the
Going over your
disciples.
head.
It was going, it was like, okay, she's not. So as I go to take my daughter to register at West Georgia on a Friday, because I got up that morning, I said, I was the last one to see her alive. I said, Mom, I'll be right back. I'm going to take her up to the school to register. I'll be back. She said, okay. While I was on a college campus, she was gone.
Mhm.
But she told me she was leaving.
Yeah.
And
And
so that's what I meant. What you said that
yeah.
Jesus, that in the Garden of Gethsemane, He allows that to when you know you're in Him and you know your time is up, then you're not. You're like, hey, I'm leaving. I ain't gonna be here, whether a person
And
catches or not.
yeah, because he repurposes death, right? He takes death is the last enemy, right? It's always the
Right.
last enemy. It's the last enemy at the end of the age, but it's the last enemy for you and I. But he's
Right.
already conquered death. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we get to death, he is there with us so that we can say, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of
Shadow
death,
of death.
I will fear
Fear
no
no
evil, for
evil.
thou art with me. And in that song, Otis, that's the first time in the song that David addresses the Lord personally. Everything is the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down. It's not until he gets in the valley that he says, thou art with me. That's that most
Yeah.
intimate. And here's the other thing that we often ignore.
Mm-hmm.
The only time recorded in scripture where Jesus utters the words. Now, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. We just don't have it
Mm-hmm.
recorded in the Gospels.
Right.
The
Gotcha.
only time Jesus is, as recorded in the Gospels, says, Abba, Father,
It was on
is
the
in the
cross.
agony in Gethsemane
Yeah.
because of the suffering. And when you get to Romans 8, when Paul says, we have that same spirit whereby we cry, Abba, Father.
Our
He's
Father.
talking about the sufferings we endure and not knowing how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit helps us in our weakness. So it's all tied to the groanings of creation, the groanings in our spirit, our human weakness.
Mm.
So Abba, Father, that term of endearment, we don't hear that from the lips of Jesus in the Gospels until that moment of agony in Gethsemane,
And
which which
Gethsemane.
which again is designed to help us cope with the human condition, because whether we like it or not, I know we want to be in control. I know we want everything to work out. But if there's anything we're having to learn right now in the current culture, is that
Hmm.
everything is uncertain, anxiety is running high, people are fearful about the future, and yet here's Jesus saying, nevertheless, Abba Father, not my will, but thine be done. Because for him, God is always good in all. So
Okay.
the prayer thy will be done is far from a defeatist prayer. It's a declaration of triumph in the face of death itself. Thy will be done.
And it allows us to see that even if I don't understand, just let
Precisely.
your just let your will be done.
Yeah.
Because like you said, I know your will is good and perfect. So I know I don't understand, but nevertheless, let your
Well, and,
will
and the
be
thing
done.
about your mom that to me is so comforting,
Hmm.
the Lord himself let her know. We're
Yeah.
doing this together. I'm bringing you home, and I know the way. And my God, that would be if ever I would think about a loved one, knowing that that would bring great comfort to myself.
Yeah, well, I had to get to that place, as you know, once you go through the
The
grieving
grieving.
and all
Oh,
that,
sure.
I had to memo, because even before that, it's amazing how God sets this up and how we miss it, as far as even trying to get her to move in with us, and we were going to lease a house at that time, and I said, "Hey, Mom, this has an extra bedroom downstairs, so you don't have to worry about going upstairs," and she said, "No. I'm not gonna move in with you all." And I said, "You just stubborn. You just don't want to." And she said, "But I tell you what I'll do. I give you $100 on." I said, "Hey, why you gonna give me money for a place that you're not even staying? What are you?" I said, "No." And so we didn't, get that particular lease that particular. We leased another one, but it was amazing. She was still being in her pain, she was still being mom. She was still being a mother. Like, let me help you out. Let me. And I was like, nah, you're not going to do that. And so it took me a while to come back to realize that, how people say, well, sometimes they're staring off.
Mhm.
And I always tell people they see something you can't see
Absolutely.
until you get to that place. And one day you
Right.
get to that place, you'll see whatever that is. But at that point, we can't. They can see. And I had to understand that what you just said. And this was what helps me with life is for me to understand I was never in control as much as I thought or think, and I came with that understanding with children. When you have children, that you're raising them a certain way, you think you're doing this, you think you're doing that, and then they'll do something and you're like, where you get that from? Like, where did you get? So what you don't understand, you were never in control, so you just have to give them back to him and let him get out the way and let him. And so it was a that what you just said touched me. That far as him in his humanity side, Jesus, far as because he understood from the spiritual side, the Godhead, he understood what was to come, and he just, in order for us to be able to, for him to be the example for us, he has to accept that in the flesh, far as that agony.
All right. So this gets really tricky theologically.
Okay,
You want to be careful how you explain
okay,
this.
okay,
He
okay.
never ceases being God and never ceases being human at the same
Correct,
time.
right. He's
So
both at
there's
the
not
same
a
time.
Jesus doesn't have a side.
Okay, I
He's
got you.
not like us in that regard.
Right,
Now we will
right.
become like him ultimately,
Sure.
partaking of the divine
Okay.
nature. But because he doesn't have a side, a human side, I know we like to talk about sides, but we got to be real careful when we do that because we
I
can end
got
up in trouble about who Jesus is. That's why,
you. Okay.
and the early fathers were really strict sticklers about that. So
Mm-hmm.
he, as the last Adam,
Mm-hmm.
willing, like there is not one moment, even in that agony, when he's not
Mm-hmm.
in charge.
Correct.
He's totally in charge. This is the sovereign God who is working all things after the counsel of his will, entering into our suffering and taking it
Right.
on himself and bringing it all the way through to transformation. So even in the midst of that, he's yet hoping that the disciples will hang with him, but they fell asleep.
Fell
And he
asleep.
has to go up and say, "You couldn't even watch. You couldn't even." So there's, but he's saying that from a perspective of knowing that they weren't going to do it anyway. He knows,
Anyway.
and so then it's enough. Get up. The betrayer is here, et cetera, et cetera, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera. But so when we think about the mystery
Mm-hmm.
that is the incarnation, we have to realize that he is entering into something and tasting death, not just as if we were one, you and I taste death personally.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Jesus tasted death for the entire human race, which is why this is God in the flesh. This is the God man. He takes on the whole of the human race in his own being.
Being.
And it's only as the God man that he can do that. And he allows his natural human will, which is not flawed like yours and mine is, to absorb our weakness and pray it through. And what he's doing is transforming us in the process. So that by the time you get to Romans 7,
I got
when
it. I
Paul
got it.
says, "The good that I would not, that I do, yet that which I
Yeah,
do, I
Paul.
would
Yeah.
not, but yet not I, but now he's not denying that he's doing it. He's saying there's something deeper at work. But that's Romans 7. Then in Romans 8, therefore, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? Thanks be to God that there is now no condemnation in Christ Jesus. And then he goes on to talk about what happens in Romans 8 by the work of Christ in the passion and then by the coming of the Spirit so that we can partake of his nature. So all of that, he takes our weak, slow on the uptake, what we would call the dilatory will, and in his embracing our suffering, he transforms it so that when we are regenerated, here's the problem most believers have, because
Okay.
all of us wrestle with, you know, messing up from time to time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
yet, in our regeneration, what
Mm-hmm.
we need to accept is that we actually delight to do the will of God with Jesus. We don't believe that fully. And yet we need to embrace that he has transformed the human will. I still have weakness. I still have the memory of who I was in Adam. Those
Mm-hmm.
things are still in him, it's all done. But in me, I got to work it out. Sanctification is a process. But I can say with Jesus, I delight to do thy will, O God, which is what the psalm, that's from the
Uh,
Psalms. And the writer to the
27. Yeah.
picks up on it. But Jesus, lo, in the volume of the book it is written, Lo, I come to do thy will. So, and we come to do his will as well. We just don't have quite the same confidence in ourselves that he does, because he says to Simon the minute he meets him, thou art Cephas, thou art Peter, John 1, right? He
Changed it.
sees the end from the beginning. He calls
Correct.
those things that are not as though they are.
You are
So,
correct.
so what mom was revealing was she was already there, even though she was going through.
Wow. Now, look, my last question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you just touched on, no, you just touched on it. As far as our confidence, is it because we seek, I don't want to say seek, hold on. We accept the normal. So, in other words, when Jesus had died on the cross, they were going to bring Merkin, St. Frank, to keep the
Right.
body from, and when
Yeah, which
she,
they had to do, right?
right. And so when she gets there, the angel is saying, why are you looking?
Mary.
for what's dead. Mary, why are you looking for what's dead, what's alive amongst the dead? Like he had already told us, I'll raise it in 3 days. But God will make a promise to us, but we still will live with what we see.
Because we're slow on the uptake. It
Yeah,
takes it takes time. So even when Jesus is at the tomb
right,
and Mary Magdalene turns to see him, she
right,
supposes him to be the gardener. Well, he is the gardener. He planted the garden in the beginning and walked in that garden. Now this is another garden, and this is the heavenly gardener, the
right.
heavenly man, the holy heavenly man. And she says, "Where have you taken him?" And when he calls her name, because our good shepherd knows us each by name. When he
Mm-hmm.
says Mary, she collapses at his feet. But then she says, "I'm not letting you go." And he says, "Stop. You're clinging to who I was on Friday.
Ooh,
I am no longer the man of sorrows. And if you keep hanging on to me, you're going to prevent me from going where I have to go. I have to ascend immediately to offer up the by the blood of the eternal covenant. I've got to sprinkle the heavenly tabernacle. Then I'm going to be back. So I need you to go ahead of me to Galilee and tell the guys I'm going to meet them and tell Peter that no matter how messed up he is, I still love him and I'm going to do everything I said I was going to do." So Mary has to let go of who she thinks he is in order to walk with who he really is.
which is an understanding of no matter how long you've been walking with God,
Uh-huh.
He can always show
Oh,
Himself.
he's still going to blow our minds, right?
Right.
Always, always.
That's beautiful. I appreciate that. Wow, because also one last thing before you go, when He shows up to the disciples
Mhm.
and they still want to, is that you, Lord? He still gave his testimony because he said, "Touch me, feel me,
Right.
see I'm not put your the
Yeah.
hand." And but we don't want to tell people who we were when they see who we are now. It's like we want to stay. Hey,
Yeah,
I've been
you got,
saved 30
yeah,
years,
yeah, but you got to tell the whole story. You got to
and
tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right?
that's
Because
what he did.
that's what people need to hear the whole story so that they can say, I want some of that. I want, that's the Jesus I want. I want to know him.
And
So,
that's what he did because he allowed when he told Mary to let him go, he ascends, he meets them in Galilee, like you
mhm.
said. But when he shows up and showing who he is now, he still gives the testimony to say, I'm
Oh
still the
yeah,
same
because he
one.
he he takes those wounds with him to glory. Those wounds are still open. They're not
Yeah,
closed, except that
yeah,
they don't hurt anymore. But
right.
they stay open because until our wounds are healed, he is still the wounded healer at the throne of God to bring us into healing and wholeness and well-being. By his stripes, we are healed.
We are healed. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Chironna.
Otis,
I
I love you.
appreciate it. And I'll text you on Instagram. You can let me know where to send that. So be safe out there, and we still love you. And God
Love you too,
bless.
man.
Peace.
Blessings.